What if the one thing sitting on your kitchen counter every single morning, the thing you've been reaching for without a second thought for decades, has actually been working against your blood sugar this entire time? Not because it's harmful, not because you need to give it up, but because of one tiny detail you've been getting wrong, a detail that almost nobody talks about, not your pharmacist, not the label on the bag, and honestly, probably not even your doctor during those rush 10-minute appointments. I'm Dr. Michael Carter, and I want to tell you something today that I genuinely wish more of my patients had known 10, 15, even 20 years earlier. It could have saved a lot of them from a diagnosis they never saw coming. Before we go any further, if you're watching this right now and you have blood sugar concerns, pre-diabetes, type 2 diabetes, or you just have a feeling in your gut that something isn't quite right with your energy levels after meals, hit that subscribe button and leave a comment below telling me what city you're watching from. I want to know how far this message is traveling, because I believe what I'm about to share deserves to reach every corner of this country. Now let's talk. Type 2 diabetes is moving through the American population like a slow flood. You don't always see it coming. It doesn't announce itself with dramatic symptoms right away. It creeps. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention estimates that over 37 million Americans are currently living with diabetes, and another 96 million, that's nearly 1 in 3 adults, have pre-diabetes. The most alarming part of that second number? More than 80% of people with pre-diabetes don't know they have it. They're going about their lives feeling a little more tired than usual, maybe craving sweets more often, maybe waking up thirsty in the middle of the night and chalking it all up to aging, stress, or just a rough week. Meanwhile, their pancreas is working overtime, sending quiet distress signals that no one is reading. I see this every week in my practice, and what breaks my heart is how often the turning point for someone's blood sugar, the variable that finally tips them into a diagnosis, is something they believed was completely neutral, something they thought was safe, something they were even told was fine. And coffee is at the top of that list. Not because coffee is dangerous. Far from it. The research on coffee and metabolic health is genuinely remarkable. But the way most Americans drink it, that's a different story entirely. Let me give you a picture of what's actually happening inside your body on a molecular level, because I think when you understand the mechanism, you'll never look at your morning cup the same way again. Your pancreas is not just an organ. Think of it as a precision instrument, like a thermostat calibrated to respond to the exact amount of glucose circulating in your blood at any given moment. When you eat, glucose enters your bloodstream. Your pancreas detects this, releases insulin, and insulin acts like a key, unlocking the doors of your cells so that glucose can enter, be converted into energy, and get out of your bloodstream. Clean, efficient, elegant. The problem starts when that thermostat gets thrown off, and it gets thrown off gradually over years through a pattern of eating and lifestyle choices that force the pancreas to work harder and harder to get the same result. Eventually, the cells stop responding normally to insulin. The pancreas compensates by producing more. But more isn't sustainable forever. At some point, the gap between what the body demands and what the pancreas can deliver starts to widen. That's insulin resistance. That's the beginning of the road toward type 2 diabetes. And what I need you to understand, what almost no one explains clearly enough, is that coffee, depending entirely on how you use it, can either help stabilize that thermostat or make it swing even more wildly out of control. Coffee contains a compound called chlorogenic acid. You've probably never heard of it, and that's a shame because from a blood sugar management standpoint, it's one of the most interesting substances you consume on a regular basis. Chlorogenic acid acts as a kind of biological speed bump in your digestive tract. When it's present in your gut before or during a meal, it slows down the rate at which carbohydrates are broken down and absorbed as glucose. Instead of a sudden flood of sugar hitting your bloodstream all at once, which forces your pancreas into emergency mode, you get a slower, more manageable rise that your body can handle without stress. Researchers at Harvard School of Public Health, after analyzing data from more than 1 million individuals, found that regular coffee consumption was associated with a meaningful, statistically significant reduction in the risk of developing type 2 diabetes. And this wasn't a marginal effect. The association was dose-dependent. More cups per day, within a reasonable range, correlated with progressively lower risk. A few years later, scientists at the Karolinska Institute in Sweden conducted a comprehensive review, pulling together data from 30 independent studies and more than 1.2 million participants. Their conclusion echoed what Harvard had found. Regular coffee drinkers, whether they drank caffeinated or decaffeinated, showed roughly a 30% lower risk of developing type 2 diabetes compared to non-drinkers. 30%. That is not a footnote. That is a clinically meaningful number. But, and I cannot stress this enough, those benefits are not unconditional. They are not built into the act of drinking coffee itself. They depend completely on how, when, and with what you drink it. And in my experience, most Americans are unknowingly dismantling those benefits before they even have a chance to kick in. Let me tell you about a patient I'll call Gerald. 71 years old, retired engineer, sharp mentally but physically struggling. His primary care physician had just told him his fasting glucose was elevated and his A1C had climbed to 7.2%. Gerald was stunned. He considered himself health conscious. He walked every morning, watched what he ate, didn't smoke, barely drank, and he'd been drinking coffee his whole adult life. When I went through his daily routine in detail, the picture became clear quickly. Gerald woke up at 5:45 every morning, went straight to the kitchen, and made himself a large cup of strong coffee. Before eating anything, before drinking water, right out of sleep. He drank it black, which was good, but the timing was the problem. Then at lunch, he'd have another cup with a spoonful of sugar, and at 4 in the afternoon, a third cup while watching the news. 3 cups doesn't sound extreme by conventional standards, but what was happening metabolically was anything but moderate. Here's what I explained to Gerald, and here's what I want to explain to you. When you wake up in the morning, your body has already been managing a complex hormonal sequence for the past hour or two before you open your eyes. Cortisol, your primary stress and alertness hormone, naturally peaks in the early morning hours. This is your body's built-in alarm system. Cortisol tells your liver to release stored glucose into the bloodstream so you have the fuel to get up, get moving, and function. It's not pathological, it's completely normal physiology. But cortisol does something else in this context. It suppresses insulin's effectiveness, temporarily making your cells a little less responsive to it. Your blood sugar goes up slightly just from waking up. This is called the dawn phenomenon, and it affects nearly everyone to some degree, but it hits harder in people who already have impaired glucose regulation. Now, here's where Gerald's morning coffee enters the picture. Caffeine directly stimulates your adrenal glands, the same glands that produce cortisol and adrenaline. When you drink coffee on an empty stomach, especially in that post-wake cortisol window, you're essentially pouring fuel on a fire that's already burning. Caffeine amplifies cortisol secretion, signals the liver to dump even more glucose into the bloodstream, and because you haven't eaten yet, there's nothing in your digestive tract to absorb, nothing to moderate the rise. No food-based signals to stabilize the hormonal response. The result is a significant, measurable, completely avoidable spike in fasting blood sugar, and you haven't even touched a single gram of food. Research published in the British Journal of Nutrition confirmed this directly. Consuming black coffee immediately upon waking, before any food intake, produces a detectable increase in blood glucose that wouldn't occur if the coffee were consumed after a meal or even just a small amount of protein. Gerald was starting every single day by pushing his blood sugar up before breakfast even began, and then he compounded it at lunch by adding sugar to his coffee. 1 teaspoon of table sugar sounds innocent. But in the metabolic context of someone with beginning insulin resistance, that small amount of sucrose triggers a rapid glucose spike that directly cancels out the protective effect of the chlorogenic acid in the coffee. It's biologically counterproductive. The acid is trying to slow glucose absorption. The sugar is simultaneously spiking it. They don't balance each other out. The sugar wins every time. And then the 4 p.m. coffee. Caffeine has what pharmacologists call a half-life of approximately 5 to 6 hours in most adults. That means if you drink coffee at 4 in the afternoon, half of that caffeine is still active in your system at 9 or 10 at night. It keeps cortisol elevated into the evening hours. It interferes with your ability to reach and maintain deep, restorative sleep. And this matters enormously for blood sugar because it's during deep, slow-wave sleep that your body performs critical glucose regulation, insulin sensitivity restoration, and hormonal recalibration. Poor sleep quality, even a single bad night, measurably degrades insulin sensitivity the following day. If this pattern repeats night after night, week after week, the cumulative effect on blood sugar control is significant and often underestimated. Gerald had been running this pattern for years without knowing it. Once we mapped it out and made targeted adjustments, none of which required medication changes, dietary overhauls, or anything dramatic, his next lab results told a striking story. Fasting glucose went from 128 down to 104. A1C dropped from 7.2% to 6.5%. In 12 weeks, same medications. No radical lifestyle transformation, just a restructured relationship with his morning cup. So let me walk you through what a genuinely blood sugar-friendly coffee routine looks like, built on the actual science and refined through clinical observation. The first thing you do when you wake up is drink water. Not coffee. Water. Your body has just spent 7 or 8 hours in a relative state of dehydration, and hydration status directly affects how concentrated your blood becomes, which in turn affects blood sugar readings. A glass of water first. This isn't optional. It's foundational. Then wait. Give yourself 30 to 60 minutes before you reach for the coffee maker. During that window, eat something. And specifically, eat protein. Not toast, not cereal, not a banana. Eggs, Greek yogurt, cottage cheese, a small portion of nuts, something with substantial protein and ideally minimal fast-digesting carbohydrates. Protein does something remarkable in this context. It blunts the cortisol response to caffeine. It provides amino acids that the liver uses for stable, sustainable energy production rather than the emergency glucose dump that cortisol otherwise triggers. Research published in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology demonstrated that consuming protein before introducing caffeine into the system meaningfully reduces the post-caffeine cortisol spike and the accompanying glucose elevation. You're essentially giving your body a buffer, a protective foundation before the caffeine hits. Drink your coffee black after that protein. No sugar, no artificial sweetener, no creamer, flavored or otherwise. If plain black coffee genuinely doesn't appeal to you, here's a modification I recommend to patients constantly. Add a half teaspoon of Ceylon cinnamon directly to the grounds before you brew. Ceylon cinnamon. And this is an important distinction because cassia cinnamon, the common grocery store variety, contains higher levels of coumarin, which can be problematic in large amounts, contains compounds that partially mimic insulin's cellular signaling mechanism. Multiple peer-reviewed studies, including a meta-analysis published in the Journal of Medicinal Food, have found that regular consumption of true cinnamon contributes to modest but measurable reductions in fasting blood glucose. It's not a drug. It doesn't replace medication, but as an additive to your coffee with zero downside at normal amounts, it's worth doing. The second optimal moment for coffee in your day is about 20 to 25 minutes before your largest meal. Typically lunch. This is where you can really leverage what chlorogenic acid does best. Taken pre-meal, it acts as that glucose absorption moderator we discussed. The food you're about to eat gets processed more slowly. The glucose release into your bloodstream is more gradual, and your pancreas can respond proportionally rather than reactively. A study from Brigham and Women's Hospital, which is affiliated with Harvard Medical School, published findings in diabetes care showing that coffee's bioactive components, chlorogenic acid and trigonelline specifically, produced measurable reductions in post-meal glucose concentrations compared to a control group within the first 15 minutes after carbohydrate intake. Pre-meal coffee isn't a new concept in metabolic research. It's just deeply underutilized in practice. The third ideal window for coffee is directly after physical activity. If you walk, swim, cycle, garden, anything that meaningfully elevates your heart rate for 20 minutes or more, your muscles immediately afterward are in what exercise physiologists call an enhanced insulin-sensitive state. They are biologically primed to absorb glucose from your bloodstream with unusual efficiency, almost like a sponge that's been wrung out and is ready to soak up water again. Caffeine consumed in this window amplifies that effect. It augments glucose uptake by muscle tissue and extends the metabolic benefit of the activity. This is a pharmacological window that the vast majority of people with blood sugar concerns never take advantage of, simply because nobody told them it exists. Now let me talk about the quiet enemies, the things that undermine everything I just described, and that you may be doing right now without realizing it. The most destructive is any form of sweetener in your coffee. Refined white sugar, raw sugar, honey, agave, maple syrup, and artificial options alike. The artificial sweetener question is contested, and I want to be fair. For decades, we told people zero-calorie sweeteners were metabolically neutral. More recent research is complicating that. A study published in Nutrients in 2021 found that common artificial sweeteners, including aspartame and sucralose, produce detectable changes in the gut microbiome, specifically in bacteria that regulate blood sugar. The direction of evidence is not reassuring for people with already compromised glucose metabolism. The safest practical position: work toward removing sweeteners from your coffee entirely. If that takes weeks, fine, but the destination matters. The second major enemy is instant coffee, particularly the single-serve packets or flavored varieties. These frequently contain hidden sugars, hydrogenated oils, and artificial flavorings, and they carry dramatically lower concentrations of chlorogenic acid than freshly brewed coffee from quality ground beans. Use real coffee, 100% Arabica, ground fresh if possible. The quality of what you're brewing matters for the bioactive content. The third enemy is pairing your coffee with processed carbohydrates. Coffee with a croissant, coffee with a pastry, coffee with sweetened yogurt. The glycemic load from those foods is so high that no amount of chlorogenic acid can compensate. You're pressing the brake and the accelerator at the same time. If you have a snack with your coffee, make it protein-based. A hard-boiled egg, raw nuts, plain cheese, something that supports rather than undermines what the coffee is doing. Let me tell you about another patient before I close. Her name was, I'll call her Dolores. 66 years old, retired, diagnosed with type 2 diabetes 2 years before she came to see me. She was on metformin, but her A1C had plateaued at 7.6% and her energy was terrible. She described feeling like she was running on fumes by early afternoon every single day. She was convinced she needed a medication adjustment. When we went through her full daily routine, I found her coffee pattern. She started every morning with a large sweetened coffee with creamer while still in bed before she even got up. Mid-morning, she had another one with a store-bought flavored creamer, and she told me she'd given up walking because her knees ached. We didn't change her medication. We shifted her coffee to 45 minutes after waking, after she'd eaten 2 scrambled eggs. We switched her to plain coffee with a touch of Ceylon cinnamon. We added a small pre-lunch cup. And with her physical therapist's input, we started her on gentle 20-minute water aerobics 3 days a week, followed by a small cup of black coffee afterward. 6 weeks later, her A1C had moved from 7.6% to 6.9%. Her afternoon energy levels, she said, were completely different. She had stopped needing a nap. She told me she felt like herself again for the first time in years. I didn't give Dolores a new drug. I gave her a new framework for a habit she already had. Now, let me close with something important to say plainly. Everything I've described today sits within the category of evidence-based lifestyle optimization. The mechanisms are understood, the clinical outcomes can be meaningful, but none of it replaces proper medical care. If you have diagnosed diabetes, do not alter your medication regimen based on any video, including this one. Take this information to your physician and have a real conversation. Ask about your coffee habit specifically, the timing, what you're adding to it, how it fits into your glucose management strategy. And if you have a family member dealing with blood sugar issues, share this with them. Sometimes the difference between managing a condition well and struggling with it comes down to a handful of daily habits that nobody ever explained clearly. Information is one of the most useful things we can give to people we love. Your body is not working against you. When your blood sugar climbs, when your energy crashes after lunch, when you wake up exhausted, those are signals, not failures. Your body is trying to maintain balance. It just needs the right inputs to do that job well. A small change in the timing of your coffee, a shift in what you pair it with, a 20-minute walk 3 times a week. These don't require willpower or expensive supplements. They require awareness, the kind that comes from understanding why your body responds the way it does, and choosing to work with it rather than against it. In my next video, I'm going to walk you through the 5 foods that quietly drive blood sugar instability in Americans over 60, foods often marketed as healthy, that research increasingly links to elevated glucose and inflammation. Turn on notifications so you don't miss it. I'm Dr. Michael Carter. Thank you for being here today. Take care of yourself and take care of the people around you. The choices you make in the small, ordinary moments of your day, that's where your health is actually built. Start with your next cup of coffee. Make it count.